with first speaker. This is Tomáš, who is Tomáš Hříbek from Institute of Philosophy. Tomáš should leave our session very early, so if you have any comments or questions, ask the Tomáš as soon as possible. So Tomáš is a philosopher. He is the chair of Department of Applied Philosophy and Ethics in the Institute of Philosophy of the Czech Academy of Sciences. He is a founding member of Karel Čapek Center, and his research interest is philosophy of mind and philosophy and ethics of emerging technologies. So, Tomáš, floor is yours.
It's a pleasure to be here. So my presentation, Le statique politique de l'intelligence artificielle. The rest of the presentation will be in English, or most of it. I figured I'm coming from, I assume that most of the participants in this workshop are coming from the fields of computer science and robotics and artificial intelligence, from the technical fields, developing these new emerging technologies. So they are not necessarily the readers of the kind of literature that I wish to introduce. So all I want to do is to give you a brief framework of how to think about certain questions that perhaps don't come up so often throughout the work on the technical aspects of robotics and artificial intelligence. So that's the theme that I wish to give you a little bit of a framework of how to think about this issue, namely is there a possibility of thinking of artificial intelligence enjoying political status? Because traditionally we think of politics as made only for humans, right? We think that things such as political ideals, right? Political values such as justice, freedom, equality, democracy, the idea of having rights, enjoying rights, are exclusively human-centered, right? There are no other possible bearers of rights and no other creatures that could aspire to uphold these political ideals. But I wonder, so what does that mean? That means that politics, that I guess we assume, right, rather unthinkingly, we assume a human-centered concept of politics traditionally. But I think that a helpful introductory way of thinking of philosophy is that philosophy is a subject that perhaps doesn't have any clear set of issues. The set of issues develops as other disciplines progress, including robotics and artificial intelligence. And the goal of philosophy is to question familiar ideas, or the ideas that sometimes are not even explicit. So the goal of philosophy is to make these ideas implicit and then realize that perhaps there are reasons to question these ideas. So the question is whether there are good reasons to challenge this anthropocentric view of politics. And I'm basically following a framework from one chapter by a famous author in the field of ethics and philosophy of robotics and artificial intelligence and other new technologies, Mark Ockelberg, who is going to be my close colleague come 2023. He's going to work at our Institute of Philosophy for next 5 years. And so he recently published this helpful intro to like whole gamut of issues that come up in connection with political aspects of artificial intelligence. And I just want to focus on the issue of the possible political status, because that seems to be most provocative. Of course, everybody, I guess, if they think about it for a minute, they realize that artificial intelligence and robotics, they obviously have political consequences, right? They either expand our freedoms or possibly impair or limit our freedoms and so on, right? So these are the kind of questions that I guess everybody, even journalists, right, write about these kinds of questions, right? But the idea of, let's say, artificial intelligence or robots enjoying political status, that seems rather unusual or provocative. So how should we go about revising our idea of politics so that even artificial intelligence can be reasonably thought of as enjoying political status? We can start from other expansions of our idea of politics or political realm, or maybe even more broadly speaking, moral realm, right? And in recent decades, I mean, again, like for most of our history and intellectual history up to at least, mid-20th century, the dominant train of thought was that only people morally matter and politically matter, right? And indeed, for most of our history, it was not even all people, right? Originally, it was just males, right, especially or exclusively wealthy males, somewhat later or much later, right, women and people who are not just of Caucasian descent, but people of all ethnicities and so on. So only in recent decades, some theorists, right, provocative theorists started to take seriously the idea of animals being included in moral and political realms, right? This is, maybe you recognize this famed author, philosopher, ethicist, Peter Singer from Australia, who has been professor at Princeton University for a number of years. And he's done, I guess, more than anyone in like expanding our notion of morality and politics, right? And people, I mean, I guess traditional argument was that animals, most animals, or no animals, right, can morally and politically matter because they don't have certain intellectual capacities that are required, right, for participation in moral discourse or political discourse, but they can suffer, right, and that's enough for Peter Singer, right? And then also in recent decades, some zoologists and animal psychologists came up. I mean, they've done research on certain animals, and they found out that actually even animals they do enjoy some intellectual capacities that we overlooked, right? Like great apes, right? Gorillas, like famed Coco the gorilla, right? So maybe we underestimated even the intellectual capacities of animals. But at any rate, I wish to, I guess, use this idea of expanding the circle, right? That was introduced by Singer, where that's exactly that's the right name, I guess, for the idea that I mentioned earlier, that we started with really narrow circle, which included only white males who owned property, right? And eventually we expanded that circle, and now we included even some animals in the circle. And why not even political circle, circle consisting of creatures that enjoy political status, not just moral status, right? So for singular sentience is enough, right? Others thought that maybe we can even argue on the basis of like contract theory that originally people thought that only those creatures that have intellectual capacities could contract, could bargain their way into political community, but authors like Mark Rowlands think that rationality is optional, right? That I won't bother you with the details, right? And then some recent theories like the Canadian philosopher Will Kimlicka argues that the idea that we cooperate with the animals cooperate with us, right? In certain ways, that should be enough for them to be bearer of rights, for instance, and to be included in political, not just moral community, right? So we could use that framework to think about robots, right? People, when they watch Boston Dynamics videos where robots are seemingly abused, they are disturbed. So we might think of it in a number of ways. We might think that this is just another vestige of anthropomorphism, right? That we anthropomorphize these creatures, especially if they have human form, human-like form, but maybe they are, strictly speaking, more like insects. It's as if you were abusing a spider or something, right? So they certainly cannot suffer in a way like we do or other higher animals do. But there is, we can look at it a different way, that if robots are sufficiently sophisticated, they set goals that they, for themselves, if they are autonomous enough, they set goals for themselves that they want to meet and so on. Thwarting those goals can be seen as really abuse of maybe rights, right? That sufficiently enough sophisticated robots can have. So, this is, so we can use that framework that was originally developed with respect to animals to think about robots too. So one traditional political way of thinking about robots was that we should think of them as slaves, right? That's the idea by famed roboticist Joanna Bryson in a paper included in this volume. It's a paper that's called Robots Are Slaves, right, or Should Be Slaves or something. But I would say, I would tend to agree with people who think that this is rather dangerous given our history of this peculiar institution, right, of slavery. This is a rather dangerous way of like instrumentalizing anything or anybody, because it can have impact on interpersonal relations, right? Okay, so last year or 2 years ago now, I think it was last year, a new book was published by another roboticist, Kate Darling, who thinks, I think, of a much better analogy, right, to think of robots and to think about their political status, not as slaves, right? That's the institution, I guess, that we should really leave behind, but rather as animals, right? Once upon a time, it's not such a long time ago, just a couple of centuries ago, Europeans, right? I think it was as recently as 17th century. Europeans put certain animals on trial. For instance, if some hogs destroyed somebody's property, for instance, the hogs were held accountable and were put on trial and were convicted, right? So, and other kinds of animals too. So we might think that those people who practice that were ignorant of the capacities that are necessary for moral responsibility or political responsibility, but maybe the very idea of, thinking of robots in analogy with animals rather than, persons, human persons, is a really fruitful idea. And then we could think of all kinds of robots, right? Some of them would be analogous to pets, others to farm animals, and so on. And we have already, throughout generations, we have developed different relations and different moral and political expectations with respect to those different kinds of animals. The most provocative idea of robots eventually enjoying rights, that's maybe connected to that political history of, that some people used to be slaves and then they were liberated and now they were given political rights and so on. But maybe that's based on rather limited idea of political rights, because there are all kinds of rights then, and that doesn't have to be just human rights. So David Gunkel, a contemporary American author, thinks of robots as enjoying non-human rights that are maybe something like permissions or privileges, right? Not necessarily the kind of elevated rights that we ascribe to ourselves. Right. So that's robots as, machines that are more or less individuated, that navigate their way throughout environment. But how about artificial intelligence as basically kind of non-embodied, maybe coinciding with World Wide Web or something like that, not something that's easily individuated. So framework for that could be that some ethicists who also wrote about moral and political status of animals also expanded that idea to not just individual animals, but the entire species or ecosystems or even the entire biosphere, right, as enjoying moral status and political status, right? So here I guess we have to tread carefully, because this is the area where it could easily degenerate into some kind of new age mumbo jumbo. That's why I picked this image. It looks like, beliefs of some sect, new age sect from California or something. But there are actually respectable authors who try to think hard about the idea of non-human nature, the entire ecosystem, for instance, or biosphere even, enjoying intrinsic moral value, right? So rejecting the old anthropomorphic idea that the value only comes to the world with humans who evaluate things and put premium on certain things rather than others, right? So this is the idea that Holmes Rolston III tries to develop in this classic book, right? So closer to mumbo jumbo, I think, is the work of the recently deceased famous British scientist James Lovelock. I was surprised that people poured such a praise on, maybe because he's recently deceased, but I thought that this whole idea of Gaia, like the entire planet, enjoying, like being a person, not just organism, but maybe even person or something, that's really incompatible with modern evolutionary biology. So it's unfortunate to see an author as famed as the French philosopher Bruno Latour, right, who buys into this stuff in his recent book Face à Gaia, right? That so he buys this idea that the entire planet is something like a superorganism. But I mean, in a limited form, right? So now we can use that as a framework for thinking of artificial intelligence and its possible political status, right? As something that's all-encompassing rather than individuated in a robot body here and now. So the last idea, posthumanism, right? Recently there's been so much talk of posthumanism. So that impacts thinking of AI and its possible political status as well, right? So here I'm illustrating the idea with the still from a movie that you might have seen, rather recent movie, Transcendence, right, with Johnny Depp as a computer scientist who is fatally wounded, and before he dies, his consciousness is uploaded onto World Wide Web, and he becomes a disembodied inhuman and really, of course, threatening intelligence, right? Super intelligence whose goals are incompatible with those of humanity, right? So that makes for a good movie, right? But there's been in post-humanist literature, there's been a lot of talk whether artificial intelligence, especially super intelligence, right? Whether it's going to be cooperating or not, right? So maybe you've come across even computer scientists read Ray Kurzweil, right? So maybe you've read some of his works, and maybe you're realizing that although he wrote when he published the book that singularity is near, we're almost there, and we haven't reached that point yet, right? But some philosophers, right, picked up that idea, and so, for instance, Nick Bostrom thinks that that goals of superintelligence would really be incompatible with those of humanity, right? But I think so this is kind of familiar stuff. I guess this is familiar to anybody, even people who just read newspapers, because journalists love to discuss these ideas, right? This kind of like artificial intelligence as a terminator who wants to wipe out humanity. But I think the interesting philosophical idea is that we could think of politics as not being centered on humans at all, and maybe even humans being marginal to politics. Like future politics could be centered on artificial intelligence with its own goals, not necessarily threatening humanity, but maybe being uninterested, right, in humanity. So I think that's the interesting idea in the context in which I'm discussing this, that, politics could have completely new subject, right, namely artificial intelligence, and it could completely be oblivious even of humanity, right? And some of these post-humanists, such as William MacAskill, he just published this book that's now a huge academic bestseller, What We Owe to the Future, what we owe the future. And he has the idea that politically we matter nowadays, so the present generation, only to the extent that we work on making possible the future generations that will eventually merge with artificial intelligence or be surpassed by artificial intelligence. And that's the only thing that matters, right? So other interests that we might presently have, they don't matter, right? So that's the framework. I'm done. That's the framework that I wish to introduce. Okay, I'll skip. This is kind of like more. This was this stuff about superintelligence surpassing humanity as a political subject. I guess that's really outlandish. There are more down-to-earth ideas, I guess, like the political status of those humans who merge with machines, with artificial intelligence, like cyborgs, right? So there is now considerable literature on citizenship for cyborgs, for instance. How should they be included in political community and so on? But I'll skip that, and merci pour votre attention.
Thank you, Tomáš. I have one question from a slide. It's a little bit complicated question because there is a mix Czech and English language. How could you extend your theory of robots enhanced by a living animals, by nature? If I can understand the question.
I don't understand.
Mm-hmm. This is the question, the first one.
These are not my theories. This was just an overview of literature that I imagine might be interesting to people who normally work in robotics and artificial intelligence. So I didn't present my theories, just a certain overview. But yeah, so how could you extend your theories for robots enhanced by a living? Yeah, and there is some mix up with Czech language. I mean, the rest of the sentence doesn't make sense. I'm sorry.
If I understand correctly, how the theory of robots can be improved by ideas coming from a living.
But I don't understand what that's.
Me too. Sorry. So that is another.
I have major problems with this whole discussion. For me, AI systems are machines. We build them, we control them, we define what they're doing, and we should continue looking at them as machines. There is this anthropomorphization issue. That's a psychological issue from my perspective, and yes, we need to deal with that. But in terms of the ethical discussion, in terms of what rights should AI systems get, I think we have way more important issues on the ethical side than discussing that, right? I mean, how do AI systems, how should we design AI systems, how should they behave to support humans and so on? So I would really encourage us to focus much more on this hands-on problem of ethics that really we impact in the future.
Yeah, sure. Like most of literature in technology ethics and AI ethics and robot ethics focuses on the issues of like how to develop an ethical algorithm and so on, right? But I thought that there is also this debate, right, that I wish to present, and of course it concerns future possibilities. But I think it's better to be prepared than be surprised 5 or 10 years later. And I haven't heard argument like you said that we should treat artificial intelligence always and forever as machines, but what is the argument for that claim? It's just a claim. I mean, why should we? Why shouldn't we do something else? If there are historical precedents, like we used to kill greater apes indiscriminately, and now gorillas in some countries enjoy rights. And even ecosystems in some countries, like in Bolivia, a particular ecosystem is ascribed moral status, a certain river and the vicinity, for instance. So, you know, things change.
I don't think we can have the discussion here, but
Yeah.
I'm happy to discuss that offline. But just a very quick. We know that there's consciousness in the animal kingdom, and we don't want, at least I would argue, we don't want consciousness in machines. And that's where I see the core difference. But
Okay, I wrote a book on consciousness. I don't think that we have the kind of consciousness that we ascribe to ourselves. I think consciousness is illusion, and it's just overrated. So, all right. But yeah, we don't have time for that. So thank you all for your attention, but I have to leave for another meeting. So thank you.
Thank you, Tomáš, and thank you for a nice discussion.